She said it over breakfast. She said it quietly, the way she said most things, not because she was afraid, but because she had spent 9 years learning that volume was his currency, and she had decided, a long time ago, to deal in something else. "I want a divorce, Garrett." He was reading something on his phone. He didn't look up. He reached for his coffee cup, and then, instead of picking it up, he swept it off the table. Not by accident. With the flat of his palm, a single deliberate motion, the way you clear something that shouldn't be in front of you. The cup hit the tile floor and shattered, and the coffee spread dark across the white grout, and he still hadn't looked up. "No," he said. He set his phone down face up and picked up his orange juice. "You can't afford to divorce me. You have no income, no savings in your name, and no lawyer who could touch mine. So what you actually want to do is finish breakfast and stop saying things you don't mean." He took a sip. He looked at her for the first time. She was looking at him the way she had been looking at him for the past 4 months, with the particular steadiness of someone who has already finished grieving something and is now simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up to what they know. She reached into the pocket of her robe. She placed an envelope on the table. "My lawyer sent this yesterday," she said. "The filing is already complete." He looked at the envelope. He reached for it. He pulled out the single sheet inside, letterhead, formal. The first paragraph confirming that it represented the petitioner, Claudia Mercer, in the matter of Mercer versus Mercer, and his eyes moved to the signature block at the bottom. The name was Margaret Hale. His face did something she had been quietly waiting to watch it do. The laugh died, not gradually. It simply stopped. Mid-breath, the way a machine stops when you pull the power. He read the name again. He put the letter down. He picked it up and read it a 3rd time, and in that 3rd reading, she could see the specific shape of what was happening to him. The realization that the thing he had dismissed as theater was not theater. And the realization, arriving a half-second later, like an echo, of exactly what Margaret Hale's involvement meant for him personally. "Where did you find her?" he said. It was not a question. "She found me," Claudia said. "After the Whitmore case. She reached out." He was very still. Margaret Hale had made her name on the Whitmore case 3 years ago. She had dismantled a 9-figure asset structure that Franklin Whitmore had spent 6 years constructing specifically to divorce-proof his fortune. 4 of the best matrimonial attorneys in the country had told him he was protected. He had not been protected. The settlement took 31% of everything, including assets held in structures that 3 jurisdictions had independently certified as untouchable. Garrett knew this because he had followed the case closely. Franklin Whitmore was a cautionary tale, and Garrett Mercer had spent 9 years taking very careful precautions. He stood up from the table. "This is not happening," he said. "It's already happened," she said. "That's what filing means." He walked out of the kitchen. She heard his office door close. She sat in the quiet kitchen with the broken cup on the floor and the coffee spreading into the grout and the morning light coming through the window, and she felt, not triumph, not yet, something cleaner than that. The specific sensation of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply watching the decision become real. She had been building toward it for 4 months. She had started building on the night she had come home early from her sister's and heard him on a call in the study, and had stood in the hallway for 3 minutes without breathing and understood, from the particular warmth in his voice. A warmth he had not used with her in years, that the call was not a business call, and the woman on the other end of it was not a colleague. She had not gone into the study. She had gone upstairs. She had lain in the dark and done the arithmetic she had been refusing to do for years, the accounting of what 9 years had cost her and what they had given him, and what the gap between those two numbers looked like when you stopped letting love do the rounding. The number was large. 9 years of her salary foregone, her professional network quietly expiring while his grew. Her name appearing on nothing that mattered while his appeared on everything. And more specifically, the documents she had found in his desk 3 weeks after the phone call, transfer agreements, dated 2 years earlier, quietly moving the most valuable pieces of the marital estate into holding structures registered to entities she had never heard of, bearing his business partner's name as nominal director. She had photographed every page. Then she had called her sister. Her sister had said, "I know someone you should talk to." If you have ever been told you have no options, that the life you are trying to lead is the only one available to you, then I want you to stay with me right now, because what happened in that courthouse is going to stay with you for a long time. And if this story is finding someone who needs it tonight, please share it before you keep watching. Garrett's lawyer called him within the hour. Roland Vance had handled Garrett's affairs for 11 years, and he said, before Garrett finished explaining, "I know. Hale's office notified us this morning. Can we fight it?" A pause, the specific pause of a lawyer assembling words in the right order. "We can fight the filing. What we cannot do is ignore who filed it. Hale doesn't take cases she can't win. She doesn't take cases that won't set precedent. If she's representing Claudia, she believes she has something." Another pause. "Does she have something?" Garrett's hand tightened on the phone. He thought about the transfer documents. He thought about the photographs he didn't know existed. "No," he said. Roland was quiet for a moment that was one beat too long. "Then we're fine," he said. Garrett had introduced Claudia to Daniel Osai at a company dinner 14 months earlier, the same dinner where he had spent the entire evening ignoring her, which she had stopped finding painful and had started finding informative. Daniel was an architect with the particular quality of attention that some people possess and many more perform, genuinely interested, and it showed in the way he listened, fully, without the ambient distraction most people brought to business dinners. He had asked her what she worked on, she said, after the hesitation that 9 years of being Garrett's wife had installed in her around that question. "I used to be a structural engineer. I left the field when we had children." "What kind of structures?" he'd asked. She had told him. He had asked more questions. Garrett had not noticed. Daniel had been at the dinner, then at the charity auction 3 months later, then in her architect's office when she went to look at kitchen renovation drawings. He had been standing at the window when she walked in, and he turned toward her the way some people turn toward things they are glad to see. She had noticed. She had not done anything about it. She was not the kind of woman who left one thing for another thing. She was the kind of woman who left a thing when it was finished, and then stood in the open space and breathed, and then, when she was ready, looked around. She was not ready yet. But she had noticed. The mediation session was on a Thursday in March. A conference room on the 22nd floor, all glass and clean lines. A view of the city wasted on everyone, because no one was looking at it. Garrett had brought 2 associates from Roland Vance's firm. Margaret Hale had come alone with 1 paralegal, whose note-taking efficiency Garrett found, irrationally, the most unnerving thing in the room. Hale was 62, 5'4", silver hair, dark suit. She had a stillness that was not calm, but something with more intention behind it, the stillness of someone who moves only when it is worth moving. She placed a folder in the center of the table. Inside it were the photographs. All 47 pages. The transfer agreements, the holding structures. The entity registered to his business partner, Marcus Holt, which had been receiving assets. The lake house, the majority stake in the third fund, the 4 commercial properties in the Eastern District, for 2 years. All of it documented, dated, witnessed, notarized. All of it conducted without Claudia's knowledge or signature. Garrett looked at the folder. He looked at Claudia. She was looking at the window. "These are not marital assets," Rollins said, immediately, by training. "These transfers were made from jointly held accounts, on dates where the valuations were artificially suppressed, through a nominee structure that your client established 26 months ago." Margaret's voice was even and unhurried. "Which is fraud. Missed Vance. Not contested asset division. Fraud." She let that word settle in the room the way experienced lawyers let the words that matter settle, without emphasis, because the word itself was emphasis enough. "Mr. Holt has already been contacted by our office. He responded this morning. We have his written statement confirming the structure and his role in it, and confirming that he acted on your client's explicit instruction." The room was very quiet. Garrett's face had gone the color of old paper. Roland Vance looked at his client. His client was looking at his own hands, and what was on his face was not the expression of an innocent man absorbing an outrageous accusation. What was on his face was the expression of a man trying to calculate, very quickly, which lie would be most useful and whether any of them still were. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. A message from a number he recognized. He turned the phone face down. He had been seeing Natasha Croft for 14 months. She was a brand consultant who worked with 3 of his portfolio companies. He had told her, as men in his position reliably tell the women they are seeing, that the marriage was functionally over, that Claudia didn't understand him, that he was working on it. Natasha had believed him for 11 months. In the 12th, she had begun noticing inconsistencies. In the 13th, she had started paying closer attention. 3 weeks ago, she had seen social media photographs from a charity benefit, Garrett and Claudia, dressed formally, his hand on the small of her back. She had sent him a message that night. He had replied at 1 a.m., with 40 words that explained nothing. She stood outside the building now in the March cold, envelope in hand. She had written the letter the night before, honest, not theatrical, the particular grinding anger of a woman used as a prop in someone else's story without her consent. She handed it to the front desk and asked them to bring it to the conference room on the 22nd floor. It arrived 11 minutes later. The paralegal set it on the table in front of Garrett. He did not open it for a long moment. Then, he did. 1 page. Natasha's handwriting. It said, "I was told the marriage was over. I understand now that what was over was only his honesty, and that was over long before I arrived. I'm writing to your wife directly because she deserves to know that there are some of us who did not choose this knowingly. I hope she burns it all down. I will not be a reason she hesitates." He set the letter down. Margaret Hale watched him. "We'll need a moment," Rollins said. "Take all the time you need," Margaret said. She folded her hands on the table and looked at Garrett Mercer, and her expression was the expression of someone who has seen this moment many times. The exact moment when a man understands that the structure he built to protect himself has been entered from a direction he failed to account for, and has never once found it surprising. Garrett looked at Claudia. She was still looking at the window. Claudia, his voice was not what it had been at the breakfast table. It was not the voice of a man who sweeps coffee cups off tables with the flat of his hand. It was the voice of something much smaller. "I can explain the transfers. Marcus and I there was a reason for the structure, It was never meant to, Mr. Mercer. Margaret's voice cut across his without raising. I'd encourage you not to do that. He stopped. Whatever you say in this room, she said, is going to become part of this file. You have excellent counsel. I'd suggest you use him. Garrett turned to Roland. His hands were on the table, and they were not entirely still. What do we do? He said, quietly, out loud, to his own lawyer, in front of his wife and her lawyer, in a conference room on the 22nd floor where the city was laid out in sunlight through the glass and no one was looking at it. The question of a man who has arrived at the end of a plan without having thought past the plan. Roland looked at him. We settle, he said. The settlement took 6 weeks to negotiate and 2 hours to sign, 41%. The lake house outright. Full custody arrangement in Claudia's primary favor, and a financial disclosure requirement attached to Marcus Holt's statement that triggered a separate regulatory review of the fund structure, which was not something Garrett's lawyers had anticipated, and which removed, over the following 18 months, his ability to raise capital from 2 institutional sources that had been the foundation of his third fund's performance. He did not appear in any financial publication that year. On a Tuesday in October, Daniel Osei stopped by the office of the structural engineering firm that Claudia had co-founded 7 months earlier. She had wanted to go back, and she had gone back, and she had found that the years she had spent away had given her a perspective on failure points and load-bearing capacity that she had not had at 32, and that made her, at 41, formidably good, and he brought coffee. From the place on the corner that she had mentioned once, and he had remembered, and he set it on her desk and said, I've been trying to find a reason to come by for 3 months. I finally decided I didn't need one. She looked at him. You don't, she said. He stayed for 2 hours. He came back the next week. By the 3rd visit, he had stopped needing a reason, and she had stopped pretending not to be glad. 2 years after the breakfast, 2 years after the coffee cup on the floor and the name on the letter, and the moment she watched the laugh die mid-breath, Claudia Mercer stood in a garden she had planted herself, in a house that was entirely hers, in the particular light of a late afternoon in May, and held a fact that still sometimes arrived with the quality of a small surprise, even though she had known it for 3 weeks. She was pregnant. Twins, the sonographer had said, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone who has said this sentence many times and not yet become fully accustomed to the way it lands. Twins. Daniel had been in the room. He had held her hand through the machine and the cold gel and the image resolving on the screen, and when the sonographer said the word he had gone entirely still for 4 seconds and then laughed. Not the laugh of a man who uses laughter as dismissal or deflection, but the laugh of a man who has just received something he did not know he was allowed to want and cannot quite contain it. She had looked at his face and thought, this is what it looks like when someone is not managing you. There are people who will tell you that you cannot afford to leave, that the cost is too high, the resources too thin, the opposition too powerful. There are people who will sweep things off tables to demonstrate that your wants are inconvenient and your voice is decorable. There are people who will laugh when you say the word that is supposed to frighten you back into silence. Let them laugh. There is always a name they are afraid of. There is always a document they forgot to hide. There is always a woman, somewhere, who has spent years becoming exactly the kind of dangerous they never planned for. She had been building quietly for a very long time, and when she said the word, she already had the letter in her pocket. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needed to hear it, and subscribe, because what comes next is worth staying for.